It was supposed to be an ordinary evening for Ethan Parker, one of New York's youngest and most admired billionaires. The city skyline glittered in gold as his black limousine rolled to a stop outside an upscale restaurant. He was there for a casual dinner meeting with a business associate. Nothing more, nothing emotional. Just another night in a billionaire's endless calendar. But fate had different plans. As Ethan stepped out of the car, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the restaurant patio. He wasn't really paying attention, not until something, or rather someone, caught his eye through the wide glass window. His heart skipped. His gaze sharpened. Wait, is that Mary? He leaned closer to the glass, trying to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. There, sitting nervously at a corner table, was Mary Johnson, his quiet, hard-working maid. Her posture was tense, her smile uncertain, her hands trembling slightly as she held the menu. She looked different tonight. In no uniform. No cleaning gloves. Just a simple blue dress, slightly faded, but clean and pressed with care. Her hair was tied back neatly, her eyes shining with a fragile kind of hope. For a moment, Ethan felt a strange ache in his chest. He knew Mary. He'd seen her sweeping the marble floors of his mansion every morning, always polite, always respectful. She never asked for anything more than her salary. She rarely even spoke unless spoken to. Yet, behind her humble silence, there was always something, a quiet sadness, like someone carrying a heavy past. And now, here she was on what seemed to be a date. Across from her sat a man in his late 30s, neatly dressed, confident, with an expression that carried more arrogance than charm. Ethan watched the man glance around impatiently, barely looking at Mary. She tried to smile, to say something to ease the tension. Her words didn't reach through the glass, but her eyes told the story. She was trying, really trying, to have a normal evening. Maybe this was her chance to feel seen as more than just the maid. But something felt off. Ethan's instincts, the same instincts that made him a billionaire, told him trouble was coming. That he noticed Mary opening her small purse. She counted a few notes quietly, then folded them back carefully. Ethan caught the glimpse of a $5 bill. That was all she had. His chest tightened. Oh no, she's not ready for this place, he murmured. This restaurant wasn't cheap. It was one of the city's most expensive. The kind where a single appetizer could cost more than what Mary earned in a week. Still, she sat there, hopeful. Her date leaned back, smirking, as if he was waiting for a punchline. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw the man's expression change, amusement turning into mockery. He saw Mary's eyes drop, her shoulders tense. Her lips trembled as she forced a small smile, trying to hide her discomfort. The man laughed loudly. A few nearby tables turned to look. Something inside Ethan snapped. He took a step closer to the glass, anger rising. He didn't understand why this affected him so much. Maybe because Mary wasn't just any employee. She represented the kind of humanity he respected most. People who worked hard, without excuses, without pride. And now, someone was tearing that dignity apart right in front of him. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire's world of money and power faded away. He wasn't seeing this as Ethan Parker, CEO. He was seeing it as a man watching cruelty unfold. As Mary lowered her head, tears glistening in her eyes. Ethan whispered under his breath, "No one deserves that, no one." And in that single moment, in that one unplanned encounter through a restaurant window, Ethan's life took a turn he could never have imagined, because what he saw that night would soon change both of their destinies forever. Mary had never been on a real date before. For years, her life had been a cycle of early mornings, long bus rides, and endless housework. Every penny she earned went toward rent, her mother's medication, and her little brother's school fees back home in Georgia. There was no time or courage for romance. But that week, her friend Angela, another maid who worked in the neighboring mansion, convinced her. "Mary, come on," Angela had said with a teasing smile. "You deserve one night to smile, to feel special. This guy I know, Trevor, he's nice. He's single. Just meet him. Who knows?" Mary hesitated. "Angela, look at me. I don't even own proper shoes." Angela laughed, brushing her hand through Mary's hair. "Girl, sometimes a good heart is enough. Trust me." So Mary agreed. She took out her carefully folded blue dress, one she bought years ago at a thrift store for $6. She ironed it until it looked new, borrowed a small purse, and placed inside it 5 crisp $1 bills, her little emergency money. When she entered the restaurant that night, her heart pounded. The chandeliers sparkled, and the faint music of a violin filled the air. Everyone around her was dressed elegantly, suits, diamonds, laughter echoing across polished marble floors. She almost turned back, but then she saw him, Trevor, sitting near the window, scrolling through his phone. He looked smart, confident, wearing an expensive jacket and a gold watch that glinted under the lights. Mary smiled shyly and approached the table. "Hi, are you Trevor?" He looked up briefly, then nodded. "Yeah, you must be Mary." His tone wasn't warm, just casual, indifferent. She sat down, clutching her purse nervously. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. That he gave a half smile. "Angela said you work for some rich guy, right?" Mary nodded. "Yes, I clean and cook at Mr. Parker's mansion. He's kind." Trevor raised an eyebrow. "So you're a maid?" Mary hesitated, unsure if she should be proud or embarrassed. "Yes, sir. It's honest work." Trevor smirked, taking a sip of his wine. "Right. Well, I guess that's something." The words stung, but Mary smiled anyway. "I may not have much, but I'm grateful for my job." She tried to change the topic, asked about his hobbies, his work, his dreams, but Trevor's eyes kept wandering to other women in the restaurant. When the waiter arrived, Trevor didn't even look at her before ordering an expensive steak and a bottle of imported wine. Mary stared at the menu, her palms sweating. The prices were terrifying. The cheapest item was $20. "I'll just have the soup, please," she said quietly. Dinner was quiet. Awkward. Every time she tried to talk, he gave short replies. When the check arrived, Trevor picked it up casually, then froze. His eyes narrowed. You got this, right?" Mary blinked. "Me?" He laughed. "Yeah. I thought women these days believe in equality." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know. I thought." Trevor waved his hand. "Come on. Don't tell me you came out with no money." Mary opened her purse slowly, her hands trembling. She took out the $5, the only money she had. "This is all I can afford," she whispered, ashamed. Trevor stared at the money, then burst out laughing. Loudly. $5? In this place? Are you kidding me?" Heads turned up. Mary's cheeks burned. Her eyes welled up as she tried to explain. "I didn't know it would be so expensive." I'm sorry." Trevor stood up, shaking his head. "Next time, sweetheart, stay in your lane. This place isn't for people like you." And with that, he threw his napkin on the table and walked away, leaving her sitting there, broken, humiliated, and trying to hold back tears. The waiter approached gently, whispering, "Ma'am, would you like to settle the rest of the bill?" Mary looked down at the crumpled $5 bill in her shaking hand and whispered, "I'll pay what I can." At that moment, the whole restaurant seemed to close in on her. Laughter in the background, whispers around the room, her heart breaking in silence. She didn't know someone was watching. She didn't know that outside, through the glass, Ethan Parker had seen it all, and his heart, usually guarded by wealth and logic, began to ache with anger and compassion. Mary sat frozen in her chair, the world around her fading into a blur of sound and color. The laughter from nearby tables no longer felt like joy. It sounded like knives scraping against her heart. The waiter still stood there, his polite smile trembling. "Ma'am, the total is $142. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, clutching the $5 bill like a lifeline. I only have this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her fingers trembled as she placed the wrinkled note on the white tablecloth. It looked so small, so fragile, against the polished silverware and crystal glasses that a group of young women at the next table snickered. One of them whispered loudly, "$5? Oh my God, is she serious?" Another added with a cruel smirk, "Maybe she thought this was a diner." Their laughter rippled through the restaurant, echoing like thunder in her ears. Mary wanted to disappear. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, judging, mocking, pitying. The rich scent of steak and wine suddenly made her nauseous. The waiter shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, perhaps you can leave a contact number? We can settle the balance later." Mary nodded quickly, digging into her purse for a piece of paper. But before she could write, a familiar, cold voice cut through the air. "Unbelievable. Trevor scoffed from the doorway. He had turned back, phone in hand, clearly enjoying the scene. See, this is what happens when people like you try to pretend. He chuckled, lifting his phone slightly. Maybe I should record this, teach other gold diggers a lesson. The room went silent. Even the waiter froze, unsure what to do. Mary's face burned. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She looked at him and whispered, "Please, don't do this." Trevor rolled his eyes. "Relax. It's just a joke." But his tone carried venom. "You think dressing up makes you somebody? Newsflash, you'll always be what you are. A maid." Something shattered inside her. Those words, short, sharp, cruel, pierced deeper than any blade. The waiter finally stepped forward, whispering, "Sir, that's enough." Trevor smirked and turned away. Yeah, whatever. I've got better things to do than babysit charity cases." He left for good this time, slamming the glass door behind him. For a moment, silence ruled the room. Only the faint music from the violinist continued. Haunting, hollow, mocking. Mary sat there, staring at the untouched soup, her reflection distorted in the silver spoon. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the chair and never be seen again. The waiter, kind but helpless, leaned closer. "Ma'am, it's okay. You don't need to worry about the rest tonight. Please, just breathe." She nodded weakly, standing up, her knees shaking. As she turned to leave, her heels slipped slightly, and the purse fell open. Coins clattered across the floor. A child pointed. Someone giggled. Mary dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick them up. That's when she heard it. The quiet creak of the door opening behind her. A tall figure stepped in from outside, rain glistening on his coat. Every head turned. Mary didn't look up. Not yet. But the waiter straightened immediately, his eyes widening. "Sir." It was Ethan Parker. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. He looked at the waiter, then at Trevor's empty chair, then finally at Mary. Kneeling, broken, clutching her few coins. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Put everything on my tab," he said quietly but firmly. The waiter nodded instantly. "Of course, Mr. Parker." Mary froze. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes widened as she recognized him. "Sir, what are you doing here?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. He just offered his hand. "Come on, Mary. Let's get out of here." Tears finally fell down her cheeks. She wanted to protest, to say no, to hide her shame. But something in his tone, in his gaze, told her it was okay. Yes, she took his hand. The room fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It was filled with respect, with guilt, with the heavy realization that they had just witnessed something cruel and something kind in the same breath. And as Ethan guided Mary toward the exit, his voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that would stay with her forever. "No one deserves to be humiliated for being kind." Outside, the rain began to pour, washing away the shame, the whispers, and perhaps a little bit of the pain. Ethan Parker had witnessed countless things in his life: business betrayals, political games, and boardroom battles worth billions. But nothing had ever made his chest ache quite like what he had just seen inside that restaurant. He sat quietly in his car for a few moments after helping Mary outside. The rain tapped against the roof like the sound of regret. He stared through the windshield, watching her reflection in the glass as she stood there under the awning, trying to hold herself together. Her blue dress was soaked at the hem, her makeup slightly smudged from tears, yet there was still something dignified about her. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't blaming anyone. She just stood there in silence, small, fragile, but somehow strong. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. Why does this hurt so much? He thought that he'd seen employees get insulted before. The world was cruel, especially to those who worked hard for little. But this had felt personal. That he replayed the scene in his head. The laughter, the $5 bill, her trembling hands. Every second of it made his jaw tighten. Money was power. Yes, he knew that better than anyone. But tonight, he saw what happened when people used it as a weapon. Mary had worked in his mansion for almost 4 years. She never complained, never slacked off. When his guests spilled wine on the carpet, she cleaned it with a quiet smile. When his children threw tantrums, she calmed them down with gentle words. When his mother passed away, she was the one who stayed behind to light a candle in her memory. Ethan had always respected her, but from a distance that he never really saw her. Not like this. And now, standing in the cold rain, she looked like the embodiment of every honest soul the world had ever stepped on. He opened the car door and stepped out. "Mary," he called softly. She turned, startled. "Sir, please. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I promise, I'll pay you back for the meal." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me a thing." Her voice cracked. "I should have never come here." He was right. I don't belong in places like this. Ethan's expression hardened. "Don't ever say that again." His tone was gentle but firm, the kind that made people stop and listen. Mary lowered her gaze. "It's just, people like him. They see me and think I'm nothing." Ethan took a slow breath. "Then they're blind. Because what I see is a woman who works harder than anyone I know." For a moment, they just stood there, the billionaire and the maid, under the same awning, both silent as the rain poured around them. Ethan glanced at her trembling hands. Without a word, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Come on, let me drive you home." Inside the car, Mary sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. The city lights reflected off her tear-streaked face. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. "Why are you being so kind to me, sir? I'm just your maid." Ethan looked at her, his expression soft but serious. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on who someone is. You deserve respect like anyone else." Those words struck her deeper than she expected. For the first time that night, she managed a small, grateful smile. But for Ethan, that smile stirred something unfamiliar, something beyond pity. It was admiration, and something deeper he didn't dare name. As the car drove through the rain-soaked streets, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would never let anyone humiliate her again, that he didn't know how or why. But something about Mary's pain had awakened a side of him he thought was long gone. The part that still cared about people, not profits. And though Mary couldn't see it, in that quiet, rain-drenched drive home, Ethan Parker's heart, once made of stone and schedules, began to feel human again. The car rolled to a gentle stop outside Mary's small apartment building, an old, faded structure tucked between two convenience stores on the quieter side of town. Rain still drizzled down, tapping softly against the windshield, filling the silence that hung thick between them. Ethan turned off the engine, but didn't move. He looked at Mary, sitting quietly beside him, her fingers fidgeting nervously in her lap. Her shoulders were still trembling from the humiliation she'd endured, her eyes red and swollen. She tried to force a smile. "Thank you, sir, for bringing me home." Ethan nodded slowly. "You don't have to thank me, Mary." For a moment, she hesitated. Then her voice cracked, low and broken. "Sir, I'm sorry you had to see all that. I've never felt so ashamed in my life. I thought maybe, just once, I could have a night like other people do. Just a small meal, some company." Her words trailed off as she looked down at her hands. "But I should have known. People like me don't belong in places like that." Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. "Stop," he said gently but firmly. "Don't ever say that again. You don't need to apologize for wanting a little happiness." Mary blinked, confused by the kindness in his voice. "But I embarrassed you, sir." "You shouldn't have to," he cut her off softly. "Mary, you didn't embarrass me. The man who humiliated you did. What I saw tonight wasn't your shame, it was his." Her lips parted, but no words came. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of rain outside. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white handkerchief. He handed it to her. "Here, you shouldn't cry over people who don't deserve your tears." She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his, hesitant, unsure. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not as a servant, not as a poor woman, but as a human being. As she wiped her tears, Ethan's gaze wandered across the street. The neighborhood was quiet but rough, peeling paint, flickering lights, and the faint smell of damp concrete. He thought of how she must live here alone, after working 12-hour days in his mansion, always smiling, never complaining. "Mary," he said softly, "how long have you been working for me?" She looked up. "Almost 4 years, sir." He nodded. "And in all that time, have you ever taken a real day off?" She hesitated. "No, sir. I send most of my money back home. My family needs it." Ethan sighed, shaking his head slightly. "You take care of everyone. But who takes care of you?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. Mary didn't know how to answer. Ethan finally stepped out of the car and walked around to open her door. He held an umbrella over her as she stepped out. The rain glistened in the dim street light, each drop shimmering like glass around them. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "And tomorrow, don't come to work." Her eyes widened. "Sir? Did I do something wrong?" He smiled faintly. "No, Mary. You did everything right. Just take the day off. Please." She wanted to protest, but the kindness in his tone made her nod instead. "All right, sir." He waited until she disappeared through the door of her small apartment, then stood for a while under the rain, lost in thought. That night, back in his mansion, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, the soft glow of the fireplace reflecting off his face. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mary, sitting in that restaurant, clutching her $5 bill, trying to hold on to her dignity. It wasn't pity he felt. It was respect. And something else, a burning determination that he whispered to himself. No one should feel small for being kind. And right there, in the quiet of the night, Ethan made a silent decision. He wouldn't let that night define her. He would find a way to lift her up, to show her what she truly deserved. The world had humiliated her in public. Now, he would restore her pride, quietly and completely. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell harder now, a steady rhythm against the city's rooftops, like the sky itself was mourning. Mary sat by the small window of her apartment, wrapped in Ethan's coat. It was far too big for her, but its warmth comforted her more than she could explain. The scent of fine cologne and rain lingered faintly in the fabric, a reminder that someone, even just for a moment, had treated her like she mattered. Her reflection stared back at her from the fogged glass. Tired eyes, smudged makeup, and a trembling smile that couldn't hide the pain. "Why did I think I belonged there?" she whispered to herself. Her mind replayed every second of that evening. Trevor's laughter, the whispers, the looks from strangers. Each memory cut a little deeper. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was how easily she believed it. How quickly she agreed with the idea that she was less than them. Her fingers tightened around the edge of Ethan's coat. "He was right, wasn't he?" she murmured. "People like me don't belong in places like that." Then, faintly, she heard the echo of Ethan's voice in her mind. "Don't ever say that again." It played over and over, steady and firm, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not loud sobs, just quiet streams that carried the weight of years of struggle. She thought about her mother, working herself sick to raise her. About her younger brother, who still believed she was living a good life, working for a rich man. She had always carried everyone's burdens, never allowing herself to feel broken. But tonight, she couldn't hide it anymore. She pressed her forehead against the cold window pane. The rain outside matched the tears on her face. Down below, in the dimly lit street, a car remained parked. Ethan's black limousine. She didn't notice it at first. He hadn't driven away. He sat there quietly, watching the faint glow from her window. Inside the car, Ethan rested his elbow on the steering wheel, lost in thought. He had seen so many people chase money, fame, and power, but seeing someone fight just to keep their dignity, that hit differently. He watched as her silhouette moved slowly by the window. She looked small, fragile, yet there was a quiet resilience about her that stirred something deep within him. His driver turned slightly. "Sir, are we leaving?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." He couldn't explain why he stayed, only that he needed to be sure she was okay. Finally, after a few minutes, he saw the light in her apartment go out. That he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "She's stronger than she knows," he whispered. Upstairs, Mary lay in bed, Ethan's coat still around her. She closed her eyes, but the day's images wouldn't fade. She remembered the moment Ethan had reached for her hand, the calm in his voice, the strength in his presence. He hadn't looked at her with pity, but with something else, something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes in a very long time. Respect. She touched her chest lightly. "Thank you, sir," she whispered into the darkness, "for seeing me." The storm outside began to quiet. The rain softened, turning into a gentle drizzle, as if the heavens themselves were calming after a long cry. Mary finally drifted to sleep, her face peaceful for the first time that night. And across the city, Ethan drove home through the empty streets, his thoughts consumed by one simple truth. What he had witnessed that evening had changed him. It wasn't just about a maid being humiliated. It was about the cruelty of a world that forgot how to value humility, kindness, and simple decency. His car disappeared into the night. The rain washed the streets clean, a symbol of what both their souls needed most, a fresh start. The morning sun crept through the curtains, painting golden lines across Mary's small apartment. She blinked awake, momentarily unsure if last night had been a dream. The events of the blind date came rushing back like waves crashing over her heart. She sat up slowly, the weight of exhaustion clinging to her. Ethan's coat still lay folded neatly beside her, clean, elegant, and out of place in her tiny home. For a long time, she just stared at it, her fingers tracing the fine stitching along the sleeve. "Why did he help me?" she whispered to herself. "People like him don't care about people like me." Her voice trembled with both confusion and disbelief. She had seen the wealthy all her life, some generous, most indifferent. But Ethan Parker had done something no one else ever did. He'd seen her pain and treated it as if it mattered. She made herself a small cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city stir awake. Life outside went on, as it always did. Buses honking, children laughing, the distant chatter of neighbors. But inside her, something was different. She felt broken, but also strangely seen. Meanwhile, miles away in a sprawling glass mansion, Ethan stood by his office window. He hadn't slept much. The image of Mary's tearful eyes haunted him. He could still hear the sound of laughter from that restaurant. Sharp, cruel, unforgettable. He turned away from the window and sat down at his desk. In front of him lay files worth millions, contracts, business proposals, board reports, but none of it held his attention. His mind was stuck on a single thought. How many people like Mary do I pass every day without noticing? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. Not because of something he'd done, but because of what he hadn't done, because he had lived in a world built on walls and wealth, where people like Mary were invisible. His assistant, Laura, entered quietly. "Sir, your morning meeting. Cancel it." Ethan interrupted softly. She blinked. "Cancel? But, sir, it's with I said cancel it." His tone wasn't angry. It was distant, thoughtful. "There are more important things today." Laura nodded, confused but obedient. As she left, Ethan opened his drawer and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped to a blank page and wrote just 4 words. She didn't deserve that. He closed the notebook, stood up, and grabbed his car keys. Mary was at work by noon, quietly dusting the hallway when she saw Ethan walk in. Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected to see him today, not after everything. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, keeping her eyes down. Ethan paused, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Mary, can we talk?" Her hands froze mid-motion. "Of course, sir." He gestured toward the garden. "Let's step outside." The two walked into the quiet backyard, sunlight filtering through the trees, the sound of birds cutting through the stillness. Ethan spoke first. "I couldn't sleep last night." Mary glanced up, startled. "Because of me?" He nodded slowly. "Because of what I saw. I've seen a lot of ugly things in business, Mary, but that was different. It made me realize something about the world I live in." Mary frowned slightly. Unsure what to say, he continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "People like me, we live in glass towers. We forget what real struggle looks like. And people like you carry the weight of this world without anyone even noticing." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I don't want your pity." Ethan shook his head. "This isn't pity. It's an apology. You deserve to be treated with respect, not humiliated in front of strangers. Not by anyone." She looked away, biting her lip. "It's just how life is for people like me." "No," Ethan said firmly. "It's how people like me allowed it to be." There was a long silence. Then, for the first time, Mary met his eyes fully, and in that look was something powerful. A shared understanding. Ethan took a deep breath. "Mary, I want to make things right. Not just for you, but for people like you. For all the things I ignored for too long." Her lips parted in surprise. "Why me, sir?" He smiled faintly. "Because you made me see the truth, the kind of truth money can't buy." The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. For Mary, they felt like a healing touch, not because he was a billionaire, but because he was human enough to say them. And for Ethan, it was the start of something he didn't know he was missing: redemption. Ethan Parker wasn't a man who acted on impulse. Every decision he'd made in his empire, every business move, every deal was carefully planned. But that morning, as he stood in his study staring at the city skyline, he felt something new. It wasn't strategy. It was purpose. He couldn't shake Mary's words from his mind. "It's just how life is for people like me." Those words burned inside him like a quiet fire. How could someone so hardworking, so decent, believe she didn't deserve more? Ethan had built companies, opened hospitals, donated millions to charity. Yet somehow, those acts now felt hollow. They were numbers on paper, not real change. But this, helping Mary, this felt real. He sat down at his desk, pulled out his laptop, and began typing a list titled Mary's Future. At the top, he wrote, 1. Education. He'd overheard once that Mary had dropped out of college to care for her mother. She had dreams once of becoming a teacher. Ethan made a note to find her records, maybe help her re-enroll quietly. Point 2. Dignity. In more cheap uniforms and hand-me-down shoes. She worked hard enough to deserve better. He'd have his assistant arrange for new staff clothing under the pretense of upgrading the house's image. 3. Respect. He couldn't change how the world treated her overnight, but he could change how his world did. His employees, his guests, everyone would learn to treat her as more than just the maid. He sat back, reading the list. It wasn't about charity. It was about justice, giving someone the chance the world refused to give. Just then, his phone buzzed. Laura, his assistant, had texted. "Sir, about the restaurant incident. The man, Trevor. Should I blacklist him from future events?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "No," he replied. "Leave him. I'll handle it myself." Because Ethan had another plan forming. One that would not just help Mary, but teach the world a lesson. Later that week, Mary came to work as usual, quieter than normal. She had tried to bury what happened that night, but the humiliation lingered in the corners of her mind. Yet something strange was happening in the mansion. The staff greeted her with new warmth. The chef offered her coffee instead of orders. Even the head butler, who rarely spoke to her, smiled politely. Did something happen? She whispered to herself. Then she noticed the new staff uniforms hanging neatly in the laundry room. Soft, elegant, with her name tag embroidered perfectly. She ran her fingers over the fabric in disbelief. "This must be for the new housekeeper," she said. But when she checked the list, her name was at the top. That afternoon, Ethan walked in from a meeting and saw her arranging flowers in the foyer. He smiled slightly. "Those look beautiful." She blushed. "Thank you, sir. I try to make things look nice." "You do more than that, Mary. You make this house feel alive." Her heart skipped. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from him. "You're too kind, sir." He paused, studying her. "No, I'm just finally saying what's true." Mary lowered her gaze, hiding a small, shy smile. For the first time since the blind date, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: confidence. That night, Ethan sat alone in his library, staring at a photo of his late mother. "You used to say wealth means nothing if it can't lift someone up," he murmured. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Laura, I want you to find out which community colleges are accepting late enrollments." "Yes, for a woman named Mary Williams." He hung up, exhaling deeply. A quiet satisfaction filled his chest. The plan was only beginning. Ethan didn't want to save Mary out of guilt. He wanted to restore her, her dignity, her dreams, her sense of worth. Because for the first time, the billionaire who once thought money could buy anything was learning that the greatest investment wasn't in companies, it was in people. And in that moment, he made himself a silent promise, one that would change both their lives forever. "I'll make sure the world never makes her feel small again." 3 days later, the Parker mansion was unusually busy. Staff moved briskly from room to room, polishing silver trays, arranging flowers, and preparing for what they called the annual Investors Gala. It was the grandest event Ethan Parker hosted every year, a gathering of powerful business figures, celebrities, and politicians to the staff. It was just another stressful day. But to Ethan, this gala meant something very different this time. That he stood in front of the massive window in his study, overlooking the mansion grounds, deep in thought. His mind wasn't on the guests or the speeches. It was on her. Mary had no idea that tonight's event would change the course of her life. He turned to his assistant, Laura, who was busy sorting invitations. Did you include the one I gave you earlier? Laura glanced up. Yes, sir. Though, I was a little surprised by it. You sure you want her name on the guest list? Ethan smiled faintly. More than anyone else's. Laura hesitated. Sir, you know how these people can be judgmental. That's exactly why she needs to be there, Ethan said firmly. It's time they learn what real grace looks like. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Mary was dusting the hallway shelves when Laura approached her with an envelope. Mary, this is for you, she said, handing it over. Mary blinked in confusion. For me? She wiped her hands nervously on her apron before taking it. The envelope was heavy, sealed with gold wax embossed with the Parker family crest. Her heart raced as she carefully opened it. Inside was a cream-colored invitation card with elegant black lettering. Mr. Ethan Parker cordially invites you to the annual Parker Foundation Gala. Her eyes widened. She read the line again, certain there had been a mistake. This can't be right, she whispered. Laura smiled gently. It's no mistake, Mary. Mr. Parker personally requested that you attend. Mary's breath caught. But I'm just the maid. I can't go to a place like that. Laura's voice softened. Maybe it's time you start believing you belong in places like that. Mary stood frozen, the invitation trembling in her hands. A part of her wanted to laugh. The very thought of her standing among billionaires in that grand ballroom felt absurd. But another part of her, the part Ethan had unknowingly awakened, whispered, why not? That evening, Mary stood before her small mirror, nervous hands adjusting the simple navy blue gown she'd borrowed from Laura. It wasn't new, but it fit her perfectly. She took a deep breath and whispered to her reflection, you can do this. When she arrived at the mansion's ballroom, the sight took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, violins played softly, and the scent of roses filled the air. The guests sparkled in diamonds and designer suits, chatting and laughing with glasses of champagne in hand. As Mary stepped inside, conversations paused. Eyes turned toward her, curious, judgmental, whispering. Is that one of the maids? Someone muttered. I didn't know the staff were allowed in tonight. Another voice sneered. Mary's heart pounded, and for a moment, she wanted to turn and run. But then, across the crowd, she saw Ethan. He stood tall, elegant in his black tuxedo, speaking with a group of investors. When he caught sight of her, his eyes softened. He excused himself immediately and walked toward her. The whispers around them grew louder, but Ethan ignored them. Mary, he greeted warmly, extending his hand. I'm glad you came. Her voice trembled. Sir, I don't belong here. He smiled gently. You belong anywhere you choose to stand. He offered his arm, and she hesitated, then took it. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the billionaire escorted his maid to the center of the ballroom. For Mary, the moment felt unreal. Every chandelier sparkled like 1,000 stars above her. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. And for Ethan, it wasn't about defiance. It was about justice. About showing the world that dignity had nothing to do with wealth. He leaned closer and said softly, Don't worry about them. Tonight is about you. She blinked back tears, her voice barely a whisper. Why me, sir? He looked at her with quiet sincerity. Because it's time they learned that grace doesn't wear a price tag. The music swelled, and as they walked together through the murmuring crowd, one thing became clear. Ethan Parker's plan had just begun to unfold. And for Mary, that invitation wasn't just a card. It was a doorway into a life she never thought she deserved. The grand ballroom glittered under the chandeliers, a sea of tuxedos and shimmering gowns. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, but all of it faded into whispers the moment Ethan Parker entered arm in arm with his maid. Mary could feel every stare piercing through her. Her heart raced as she tried to keep her head high, though her palms trembled. The marble floor beneath her heels suddenly felt endless, and every step echoed like thunder in her chest. Who is she? I heard she's just one of his servants. A maid? Here? What is Ethan thinking? The whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras flashed discreetly. Guests exchanged knowing smirks. To them, it was scandalous. The billionaire, bringing a maid as his companion. Mary's chest tightened. Sir, maybe I shouldn't be here, she whispered. Everyone's looking at me like I don't belong. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression calm but firm. Mary, listen to me, he said quietly. They don't decide where you belong, you do. She nodded weakly, trying to hold back tears. His voice, steady and sure, anchored her trembling spirit. A waiter approached with 2 glasses of champagne. Ethan took one, handed it to Mary, and raised his in a subtle toast. To courage, he said softly. Mary hesitated, then clinked her glass against his. To courage, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Nearby, a group of wealthy guests murmured under their breath. Among them stood Trevor, the same man who had humiliated her on their blind date. He froze mid-sentence when he saw her standing beside Ethan, radiant under the chandelier light. His smirk faded. No way, he muttered. The woman beside him chuckled cruelly. That can't be the same maid from the restaurant, can it? Trevor's jaw tightened. It's her. And that's Ethan Parker with her. Suddenly, the tables had turned. Ethan guided Mary toward the stage as the music faded. The crowd's murmurs rose. Anticipation, confusion, disbelief. Ethan took the microphone from the host, his deep voice commanding the room. Good evening, everyone. He began, his tone calm, but filled with weight. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to speak about something far more important than money or status. The room fell silent. Even the waiters paused. Ethan glanced at Mary, then at the audience. Most of you know me as a businessman, but what you don't know is that success means nothing if it blinds you to humanity. He continued, his gaze unwavering. A few days ago, I witnessed someone I deeply respect being humiliated, not because she did anything wrong, but because she was born with less than others. Trevor stiffened. His drink froze midair. Ethan went on, his voice firm. That woman works for me. She cleans the halls you walk on and ensures my home feels alive. And yet, I saw her treated as if she were invisible. He took a slow breath. Tonight, she stands beside me, not as my employee, but as a reminder that dignity has no price tag. A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Cameras clicked. Some faces softened with guilt, others twisted in discomfort. Mary stood frozen beside him, her eyes glistening with disbelief. She had never felt so seen in her entire life. Ethan turned to her and said gently into the microphone, Mary, you've shown me what real strength looks like. This night, this event, is as much yours as it is mine. Applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then spreading like a wave. Not everyone clapped, but enough did that Mary's heart swelled. Trevor's face flushed red with embarrassment. He slipped away through the crowd, unable to bear the weight of what he'd done. After the speech, Mary stood quietly in the corner of the ballroom, tears slipping down her cheeks. Ethan approached, concern in his eyes. Are you all right? He asked softly. She smiled through her tears. I don't know what to say. He smiled back. Then don't. Just know this. You deserve this moment. Every second of it. As the orchestra resumed, Ethan offered his hand again. Dance with me. Mary hesitated, glancing around. But everyone, they've already seen enough to talk, he interrupted with a grin. Let them see what respect looks like. She laughed through her tears and placed her hand in his. Together, they stepped onto the dance floor. And as the music swelled and the crowd watched in stunned silence, the billionaire and the maid moved gracefully under the chandeliers. 2 souls from different worlds, united by something stronger than wealth, not scandal, not charity, but humanity.